just recently, during this weekend, I saw Captain America Civil War. Now, I thought about doing a movie review on that, but I'm not for sure. Partly because I didn't get that many hits for Batman v Superman review that I did, and also partly because a lot of other people do movie reviews, and so I'm not for sure if I would do a movie review for that. But, something I really did want to talk about is how the failure of Iron Man 3 affects the MCU, that is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. How, the problems with this movie, how it affects later movies, and various other things. First off, sequels are sometimes very difficult. For Captain America, I would say each movie has been doing very well. It's one of the better, movies that had good sequels. Most of the time, as in the case of Iron Man 3, a movie doesn't capture the feel of the original, and, some people are disappointed. Captain America, Winter Soldier, and Civil War is a completely different story. Although I would say that in some ways I felt that Civil War was kind of more of a semi-Avengers movie, a little bit more than a Captain America movie. But that's a whole other thing. But anyways, getting back to Iron Man. First off, there are two major things that, reason why this movie failed. And the first thing is the fan rage about the Mandarin. Now, just to backtrack a little bit. Iron Man was created in the 60s. The terrorists that have him in prison are Asian. The Mandarin at the time period is Asian. Unfortunately, there are some Asian stereotyping with this. Now, the first Iron Man movie came out in 2008. It is somewhat adapted from the 2006 Iron Man Extremist storyline. And I think there was a motion comic of Iron Man Extremis, or maybe that's just something I saw on YouTube. And I remember watching it and feeling that it was so in touch with the movie that I didn't really need to see the entire storyline of Extremis, because it's so much in touch with what we see in the Iron Man movie. Now, in the Iron Man movie in Extremis, Iron Man is kept in prisoners by Arabs, and there's some Arab stereotyping, so we're trading up one stereotyping for another. I'm not really comfortable with either, frankly, but, this is nothing new. As I talked about with my, 30s Batman, actually 40s, I'm sorry, a Batman movie serial, the very first one, which was made during the Second World War. There's an Asian villain, there's Asian, stereotyping, so nothing new here. But that's just the situation the way it is. I can't, excuse it, I can't condemn it, I can't condone it, it is what it is. Anyways, the thing you have to remember about the Mandarin, or at least I feel, he's kind of just another comic book knockoff of Fu Manchu, and there have been a lot of those in comic books. Ming the Merciless. Even James Bond, Dr. No. Not a comic book, but still. Even Dr. No is a knockoff of Fu Manchu. And Mandarin is no exception from this role. He's still the yellow peril, type of Asian villain, heavy stereotyping. Yes, he has the gimmick of the rings and the magic and so on, but an important fact, for the 90s animated series, which I have, and first season, some people aren't entirely fans of, but people like the second season a lot more. We have the Mandarin as the main villain for this series, and he's, colored green, as you see here, which is actually typical of Asian villains during the 90s. In fact, For James Bond Jr., there was Dr. No, and he had green skin and so on. So again, we have a Mandarin, but he has green skin. So attempt sort of deflect the stereotyping that we had originally. Now, where am I going with this? Well, let's remember that movie studios want their movies to sell, not just in this country, but in other countries. Where's the other major country that, gets movie tickets? Well, guess what? Asian countries. China, Japan, whatever. Especially China, because hello, there's tons of millions of people there that can go buy a movie ticket to see a movie. Would a movie studio really have an evil Asian, character and, try to sell movie tickets? I don't think so. I don't think they would risk that. In fact, let's talk about something else. Just briefly. The Wolverine movie. Well, I could talk about this movie on another time, but there is an Asian villain, but I don't think he's all that evil. He has his own selfish goals, and he wants to, use Wolverine to his own advantage, but I don't think he's all that evil. Yes, maybe he's selfish, but he just wants to heal himself, be young again, reestablish his power. I don't think he's all that evil. He's not the, again, evil Asian villain that we see in earlier cinema. And again, it's just, I don't think a studio would risk having a negative stereotype, because that's what the Mandarin originally was, of an Asian villain in a movie, and then try to sell it to an Asian country. Yes, they unfortunately have Arab villains, but because of the way the country is right now, unfortunately, they feel you can get away with this. So one era we can get away with the Asian villain because we're at war with Japan. Another era we feel we can get away with the Arab stereotyping villain because of the wars we're in right now. But anyways, point is, I don't know that studios would want to risk a negative view of Asian villain in a movie here. Now, could they change up the ethnicity like the original trailers, were promising, with having Ben Kingsley as an Arab, Mandarin? Maybe they could do that. Even if we did that, and it was, instead of the fake out of Kingsley is not the Mandarin, let's say for the sake of argument, Kingsley was Arab, Kingsley was the Mandarin, I'm willing to bet you somewhere fanboys would have still reacted in a negative way. Because that's how some fanboys are. And I say this a lot. We as fanboys have to take the responsibility to accept that movies, TV shows are not always exactly like the source material. We have to accept things are going to be different, Anyways, so there's that side of it. And then there's the other side of why this movie failed. Me personally, I felt it was a complete and total ripoff of Dark Knight Rises. Now, I'll eventually get to this movie when I continue my Batman and other movie. I've been lax with that of late, but, I'll eventually continue with that series of videos. Me personally, I thought this movie was better than some people were saying. There's been a lot of negative views on this. I personally very much enjoyed it, but I'll talk about this movie later. Anyways, point is, Iron Man 3 I felt was kind of a knockoff of this movie. Anyways, that's going into at least my opinion of some of the things of why Iron Man 3 failed. Actually, you know what? I just thought of, there's the third thing. Now, in the original movie, I at least felt that Tony was atoning for something. I.e., I'm creating weapons, they're being sold and used for purposes I did not intend. I want to take responsibility for what I've done, I want to make amends, I want to use my weapons, my property, correctly. That I understand. What does he do wrong in Iron Man 3? Okay, fine. He sleeps with a girl, he doesn't give her his phone number, and, forgets about her the next day. He meets this weird, geeky guy. Well, I don't even want to say geeky because I am a geek. Creepy guy, let me say, rather. In an elevator, and this guy is being really creepy, and he, says he's going to meet him, but he doesn't. This is what he's done wrong, and this is what, the consequences of this are now backlashing on him. This isn't really that great of a crime, Fine, you slept with some, chick and didn't call her the next one. Fine, you didn't want to meet with some creepy guy. That's not really that really world changing. This atoning for wrong deeds, I understand. That atoning for wrong deeds, it's just plain silly. Anyways, so those are actually the three reasons, I thought there were two, but there was actually three, of why this movie failed. Now, how do I feel that Marvel is trying to atone for this? First off, we get Age of Ultron, which, is almost, in this movie, is almost completely ignoring Iron Man 3. Not even mentioning it in this movie, not even addressing it, and I'll get to the reference in Civil War. We're just dealing with this right now. Not even, dealing with anything that happened with Iron Man 3. And it's, in fact, it's doing what Iron Man 3 was kind of, it should have been about, which is Tony going off on his own, creating his own tech and using it for the wrong thing, and it comes back to bite him. So we see an example of him, a creation he makes that eventually causes harm, and so it's carrying on the theme of I've created something and it's gonna do wrong, I need to atone for this, and I've gone off the deep end, and this movie certainly plays into Civil War, that Tony has done something wrong that's going to affect him. So I feel it's trying to make up for the mistakes of Iron Man 3 in that way. Now, as we know, in comics, Hank Pym created Ultron, and in various cartoons and other media, we still have the Ant-Man creating Ultron, as in the comics. That's different for the movie. There's only one other time we have Iron Man creating Ultron, and that was for the earlier movie of the next Avengers, where they changed it, where Iron Man created Ultron. And this movie came out before this movie, so again, it's an earlier occasion of Tony creating Iron Man, Ultron, and Ultron, going off on his own, and so on. So, again, there's that story element of, I feel that the movie's trying to correct Iron Man 3, it's ignoring it, it's trying to do, what Iron Man was supposed to be about, really. It's almost, it's more about Tony and Iron Man than it is about the Avengers. How Tony goes off on his own, creates Ultron. Ultron turns evil. It wants to harm people. Tony has to take Ultron down, and Tony has to face the consequences of his actions. You know, you could almost consider Avengers Age of Ultron Iron Man 3 in many ways. Now, the other movies that came after Iron Man 3, Guardians of the Galaxy, so on, didn't really address it per se. And Civil War, we at least get the brief verbal reference. You know, where Tony talks about where, you know, in Iron Man 3, he destroyed the suits, but he couldn't let it go. You know, as we saw in Iron Man 3, he destroyed his suits. Supposedly, he couldn't wear them anymore. And one of the better scenes was Pepper Potts getting the Iron Man stuff, and she's able to use it, which is never referenced again. Anyways, if I remember correctly, and yet to bear with me, it's been a while since I've seen this movie, and there's a lot of this movie that, you know, just quite completely wiped from my mind. You know, some things that you've been listening, I remember, obviously. This part I'm a little fuzzy on. But as I remember, you know, Tony destroyed his suits. I think he couldn't wear them again, it was referenced. And, you know, Pepper Potts was kind of, you know, had this really great moment here. And again, that's another element of how I felt that Iron Man 3 was ripping off, you know, Dark Knight Rises. That, like Batman, Tony is giving up what he created. He's giving up the life. And, you know, stuff like that, you know. So, you know, Age of Ultron completely ignores Iron Man 3. Ignores the destruction of the suits. Doesn't even talk about Pepper. We just see Iron Man, per normal, in a suit, doing what he usually does. But again, the movie is kind of making up for the mistakes of Iron Man 3. Civil War has the verbal reference to the destruction of the suits, but he also says that, you know, he couldn't give it up, and now he's because, you know, he's still being Iron Man, you know, he's still, you know, living the superhero life, and Pepper doesn't want to talk to him anymore, you know, so it very briefly, you know, talks about only, you know, for this scene, you know, although it was nice that he says that it's mentioned that 8 years ago, you know, because again, Iron Man 8 years ago was the start of the MCU. You know, so this is the beginning of, you know, Tony coming out as Iron Man, and a lot of villains come out, and a whole lot of other things, you know, rise from this. There's that verbal reference, you know. So, anyways, overall, you know, I just feel that because Iron Man was the failure that it was, it's completely changed the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because what if it hadn't failed and had succeeded? Would we have had Ultron as in comics? That is, Ultron created by Ant-Man. We could have had maybe a scene of Kirk Douglas come in as, you know, a retired, you know, Hank Pym, and say, hey, I've created this Ultron, it's now out of control, you Avenger guys have to help me here. And the Avengers, you know, fight Ultron, and so forth. We don't get that. We get Tony creating Ultron, so on and so forth. You know, so for what could have been a reference to the original comics is instead trying to correct the mistakes of an earlier movie. Civil War quickly verbally trying to either excuse it or get past, why the ending of this movie is no longer valid. I.e., I can wear suits now, Pepper's not around. This is why. And, I don't know if we'll ever get an Iron Man 4. And Ultron and Civil War, we have so much of Tony. He's taking a lot of center stage here. And, so that's one more thing. So, again, my point is that it's interesting how one movie does badly, and the entire MCU is trying to make amends for that, or ignore it, or, try to correct mistakes. Let's not even get into the Hulk situation where, because Universal still owns the rights, Hulk has to be written out of the movie, and well, first off, we get a new actor as Hulk, and, it's almost as if the Hulk movie with, I can't remember the actor's name anymore. The earlier Marvel, hang on, because I'm not going to let this go. The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton. Thank you. It's almost as if we don't entirely talk about this movie other than a brief reference in the first Avenger movie. Other than that, we don't entirely address this. Maybe that's partly because Hulk's still owned by Universal. Maybe that's other things. I don't know. Anyways, so yeah, that's just what I wanted to talk about. I would be interested to know other people's thoughts, presuming you've lasted this long through my ramblings, because I find it very interesting. And hopefully you do as well and have been entertained here. So thank you for watching. Take care.